Hey everyone, this is Group 5's final presentation. The title of our research is Liberating the World Through Modern Anthropology, a case study of the actions taken by Ferguson, Missouri after Michael Brown's death. So the purpose of our research is to discover what kind of implications digital anthropology and activist anthropology have on our understanding of human culture and anthropological theory. We will discover these implications through an analysis of the documentary Whose Streets, presented by myself, Matthew Falibene, and we'll explore the application of Said's Orientalism, which deals in large part with the role of rhetoric in the media and perpetuating racial stereotypes and discrimination, presented by Brianna Emmerich. And finally, we'll look at the impacts of decolonizing anthropology in the context of a broader discussion about race, as exemplified by the events in Ferguson, Missouri, by Melissa McKelvey. The discussion will also encapsulate how activist anthropology, in which anthropologists are ready and willing to fight for the rights of others alongside them, can play a role in improving racial relations and justice within our world. So my section of this project is we're going to analyze the documentary Whose Streets, which was directed by Sabah Foyen. So the whole premise of Whose Streets depicts the results of Michael Brown's death by Ferguson, Missouri's police officer Darren Wilson on August 9th, 2014, through the eyes of the Ferguson community, which is an extremely important part of the documentary. It gives more of a biased side to the community view opposed to the police department's view, but is very necessary in activist anthropology because they're trying to get a certain point across. So I believe this documentary embodies the problem of systematic racism within our country and gives us an insider perspective of how it feels to be a black person in modern American culture. We're finally able to see and understand this perspective a little bit better due to the advancement of technology and social media within our culture. So a little backstory on the Michael Brown case, which happened in 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri. You're going to hear pretty much two sides of the story, and you hear the community side, which pretty much represents Michael Brown as an extremely innocent individual that had his hands up, was told the police officer don't shoot, and Officer Darren Wilson shot him anyways. That's how the community perceives it. That is how the majority of the media perceived it and the majority of America perceived it. Which I'm not saying is wrong. I'm just saying it's one side of the story, and as anthropologists, we need to understand both sides of the story to have a more holistic view. So now, when we look at the Department of Justice, they conducted their own report on this whole event. It's like an 86-page document that you can find online. When you go over it and you review all the evidence, you see that the story changes from Darren Wilson's perspective and the perspective of the Department of Justice. You see that Officer Darren Wilson told Michael Brown and his friend to get out of the middle of the street. They didn't do so, so Officer Wilson decided to back his squad car up, almost clips Michael Brown, decides to open the door really close to him. Michael Brown shuts it back on him. Darren Wilson tries to get out again when Michael Brown reaches in the car to try and start strangling Officer Wilson. This is where I believe Officer Wilson probably reached for his firearm, and I believe that Michael Brown saw this as well and reached for the firearm as well. And this is where the evidence comes into key playing, because you see there were two shots fired within the car. One injured Michael Brown's hand and got lodged in the vehicle. The other one was shot pretty much out the window and missed. This is when Michael Brown decided to flee and started running away. Officer Wilson gets out, tries to chase him to prevent him from causing any more harm in the community, which is how it's perceived from the Department of Justice. And at a certain point, Michael Brown decides to turn around, and this is the controversial point, turns around and puts his hands up, but it doesn't say in what manner. And that's the issue that's always been debated, because there's only been 3 eyewitnesses that have said he actually put his hands up, and there was like 100 and something witnesses that said he put his hands up. And this is, if you put your hands up like this and you're 50 yards away from a police officer and he claims that you're charging him, he can perceive it as fearing for his life, especially when Michael Brown, being such a large man, or a large boy, at this time he was just 18 years old, and he was, I believe, 6'4" and like 265 pounds. He's a very big individual, where Officer Wilson wasn't nearly as big and was by himself. And you have to realize, as a police officer, you have to go into every situation realizing that there's always a gun involved, because you have one strapped to your hip. And yes, it was already drawn, and he told Michael Brown to stop several times. And from the report, it says Michael Brown continued to charge at Officer Darren Wilson, and it wasn't until about 19 feet in front of him when Darren Wilson decided to open fire. So you can see both sides of the story. You see where systematic racism most likely played a role in this issue. But to get away from that and more onto the film, let's start discussing the narrative that's presented in Whose Streets. We see that decolonization and a representational issue within the community of Ferguson, Missouri is very present, because you have all these police officers that are of white descent, and then you have a whole community made up of minorities. So these officers aren't understanding the cultural background within the community that they're policing, which is a huge issue when we look at how the police department was started way back in 1829, I believe, was when the London Metropolitan Police Department was started by Sir Robert Peel. And one of the Peelian discussion points that he always taught his officers is the public are the police and the police are the public. So what that means is you need to be a police officer that represents your community, and your community needs to be people that are glad to represent their police department. And you need to coexist in this manner and understand that as a police officer, you need to really understand your community and relate to them. And as white police officers, they probably weren't able to really relate on the community of Ferguson, Missouri, and I think that caused a lot of the issue, which we also see in anthropology today, where individuals that are white and use an ethnocentric viewpont don't really understand the cultures that they're studying, because they don't have that insider-to-insider viewpoint. And to carry on with the documentary, we continue to see this narrative of decolonization and representation evolve from individuals showing that, okay, they're trying to go home, the police officers are telling them to go home, when in fact those police officers don't live in their community. So what right do they have to really enforce laws within their community, besides the legal standpoint, to really enforce this community cohesion and dictate what's going on in their community, when they really don't have any say-so or pull in the representation of their community members. And we also see people that have never had police records claim that once they moved to Ferguson, they were targeted by the police officers, and now they have a huge rap sheet. Something that is like systematic racism to a T. Like, you see it over and over in numerous communities. And I think a lot of it has to do with the colonization of police departments and their history. And one of the other things that really stands out is, like, you see the protests happening in the documentary over and over and over, and everybody's shouting, "We are human too." And I think that's something that's extremely important, because when you see anthropology, you see white anthropologists studying cultures, and they're talking about them like they're others. And that's something that the police department isn't understanding of. They're treating everybody else as others, and they're these high, mighty, extended arms of the law. They're not others, because the police are the community, or the police are the public, and the public are the police. Like, you are one and the same, and that's something that's very important. And we also see one of the main characters, Brittany, in this, that ended up having to go to court because of a protest that she started across one of the highways. And a police report states that she used tribal chanting in her protest, and scared an individual within a car because they started tapping on the car, and this individual sped off and hit some people, and yet Brittany was the one being charged with a crime. The fact that they used the word tribal chanting really says something about the Ferguson Police Department and their understanding of different cultures. I think it's really sad, and it just really shows you how certain white people or certain jobs don't have the cultural understanding to progress the relationship within their community. I really hope that this has been helpful in our understanding of Ferguson and the case. Unfortunately, decolonization in anthropology and in police departments is no easy task. However, I think using digital media like this documentary and social media to help fight these injustices within our world is a great starting point for us to create change. So if you'll bear with me for a second, I'd like you to pause the video, click on the link that I've provided in the discussion to see the clip for our presentation, and then Brittany is going to talk about the clip and then give her part of the presentation. Thank you very much. Bye.